Jessica Camilleri, a woman from Sydney, Australia, decapitated her mother in a tragic incident on the night of July 20th, 2019. Having faced humiliation at school due to her apparent cognitive delays and learning difficulties, Jessica retreated into resentment. She developed aggressive behaviors when feeling threatened or when she thought she was being mistreated, which could range from a stranger's glance to her mother's refusal to give her extra food. Her paranoia grew, fueled by an obsession with horror movies like the 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This film, known for its intense violence, was banned in several countries, including Australia and the UK. It's about a group of young people in Texas being chased by chainsaw-wielding cannibals. On that fateful Saturday night, Jessica used 7 kitchen knives to stab her mother in the skull, decapitate her, and then threw her head into a neighbor's yard. After the act, she shockingly asked the police if a doctor could sew her mother's head back on to bring her back to life. Jessica Camilleri was the second daughter of Rita and Vince, an Australian Maltese couple. Unlike her older sister Christy, Jessica was born with a mental disability. While the average person's IQ ranges between 90 and 110, Jessica's was between 55 and 60, placing her in the bottom 1% and categorizing her mental delay as mild. People with mild intellectual disability often learn to speak, read, write, and do math later than others, but they can still communicate and express themselves in daily life. Jessica was late in reaching developmental milestones like walking, talking, and coordinating movements. Due to her condition, she was enrolled in school much later than her peers, facing early on the discomfort, teasing, and bullying from classmates for being different. Jessica dealt with the resulting stress and anxiety through anger, particularly towards females, and developed intermittent explosive disorder. This condition is marked by sudden, repeated outbursts of impulsive, aggressive, and violent behavior, as well as angry verbal eruptions that are grossly out of proportion to the situation. Intermittent explosive disorder usually appears by the age of 6 and intensifies during adolescence and early adulthood. It's not just a normal tantrum, but a mental disorder linked to a lack of serotonin, the mood-regulating hormone in the brain. At school, Jessica lashed out at students and teachers alike, once biting a male student and refusing to let go, leading to her indefinite suspension and confinement at home under her mother Rita's care, supported by a disability pension. Besides intellectual disability and irrational bursts of fury, Jessica also suffered from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, a chronic brain condition that affects millions of children worldwide and makes it hard to control her behavior. She was also diagnosed with severe bipolar disorder, depression, and anxiety. Furthermore, Jessica had autism spectrum disorders, affecting her judgment, awareness of thoughts, feelings, and empathy towards others. Autism made simple daily activities like shopping, using public transport, banking, and working difficult for her. Jessica had obsessions, such as with her 3 favorite numbers, 2, 3, and 5, which she associated with her favorite colors, yellow, green, and purple, respectively. She liked to repeat these numbers to create random phone numbers to dial, often trying to talk to men. Once, she called a family's home in Bangladesh, India, up to 100 times a day, just because she liked their phone number. In 2018, she began harassing the staff of a meat company in Daylesford, England, even threatening the company owner Matthew Layfield's family, claiming she would decapitate them with a chainsaw. Jessica's fascination with horror movies was another unchecked obsession. She spent hours, days, months, and years rewatching gruesome videos, especially fixated on films like Saw, Jeepers Creepers, and her favorite, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974, about young people in Texas chased by chainsaw-wielding cannibals. This movie was banned in several countries, including Australia and the UK, for its violence. When her mother Rita restricted her from these films, Jessica would become furious with her. Jessica and her mother Rita lived alone in a house in St. Clair, a suburb of Sydney in New South Wales, Australia. Vince, Jessica's father, divorced Rita during Jessica's teenage years because of the continuous behavioral problems of their daughter. The marriage couldn't withstand Jessica's outbursts, leading to its downfall. Despite Jessica's low self-esteem and her childish and naive personality, she exhibited strong narcissistic traits. Deep down, she believed she was unique and deserved special treatment because of her mental disability, which sometimes made her exploitative and egocentric. Rita, however, was unwavering in her care. She knew her daughter had issues but felt it was her duty to look after and protect her. Rita even reached out to apologize to one of the victims of Jessica's harassing phone calls, admitting she was at her wits' end and unsure how to control her daughter. Although Jessica loved her family, she was especially close to her mother, who catered to all her needs and chose to keep her at home instead of placing her in a psychiatric facility for full-time care. Rita's life revolved around Jessica. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, 1 in 5 Australians, or 20% of the population, approximately 4.8 million people, reported having a mental or behavioral condition between July 2017 and June 2018. Women reported a higher proportion of mental or behavioral conditions than men, and young people aged 15 to 24 had the highest proportion of mental or behavioral conditions. Mental illness refers to a clinically diagnosable disorder that affects a person's cognitive, emotional, or social abilities. It encompasses a range of conditions, including depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and psychotic disorders. These conditions significantly impact an individual's emotions and how they interact with their community, affecting not only the individuals themselves but also their families and caregivers. The tragic event of July 20th, 2019 was not an isolated incident. 6 years before the calamity struck the Camilleri family, Jessica had been convicted on a couple of occasions for common assaults causing actual bodily harm. She had also previously attacked an aunt and her sister's mother-in-law by pulling their hair. However, she was never jailed. Instead, she was always left in the care of the one person who could tolerate her, her mother, Rita. Jessica had also been aggressive towards women in the streets and shopping centers who she perceived as looking at her wrongly or making her feel ashamed. She was once barred from a doctor's office after becoming paranoid and violent towards another patient in the waiting room. In early 2018, during a visit to the hospital with Rita, Jessica attacked a nurse. Jessica was admitted to a mental health unit for 9 days due to a severe mood disorder episode and was treated with lithium for supposed bipolar disorder, along with antipsychotic medications. By the end of 2018, about 6 months before the crime, Jessica had stopped taking her medication and started using natural remedies to manage her conditions. Rita was so desperate that she paid $2,500 to a medium on Queen Street in St. Mary's, a western suburb of Sydney, hoping to exorcise the demon she believed was inside Jessica. Rita's family and friends repeatedly warned her about the dangers of living with Jessica, but Rita insisted her daughter wouldn't harm a fly. Christy, Jessica's older sister, described their mother Rita as having a heart of gold, always putting others before herself, including Jessica, who repeatedly refused professional help. Rita's sister also recognized Rita's unconditional love for Jessica and often expressed concern that Jessica might harm her. However, Rita's motherly love blinded her to these warnings, ignoring them even the day before the fatal attack when she had to take Jessica to a police station because her daughter had made threatening calls to strangers again. On July 20th, 2019, Jessica felt humiliated by her mother in front of a man who merely walked past them in a parking lot. After visiting her sister, the two women returned home. Jessica asked her mother to order another round of food from Red Rooster, but Rita refused. Jessica then called the restaurant herself 3 times at 9:18, 9:20, and finally at 9:21 p.m. Jessica also asked her mother to call a doctor to come to their house. Rita complied, but the doctor fled the home, terrified by Jessica's behavior, which chased him until he managed to escape in his car. Rita, out of patience and options, told Jessica she would call the emergency number and request an ambulance to take her immediately to the mental health care system. Jessica's worst episode of rage was about to unfold. That night of July 20th, 2019, 57-year-old Rita was dragged by her hair to the kitchen of her own home by Jessica. Using 7 meat cleavers, 4 of which broke, Jessica stabbed her mother over 100 times in the head and neck. This act of mutilation was driven by more than uncontrollable anger. It reflected Jessica's macabre curiosity, influenced by her obsession with the horror films she watched daily. The forensic pathologist's autopsy revealed that Rita had suffered monumental injuries to her head and neck and died from multiple stab wounds with decapitation at the second vertebra in her upper neck. Rita's body also had over 90 defensive wounds, indicating she was conscious for a significant part of the attack, experiencing extreme physical pain and emotional terror from what her daughter, whom she had devotedly cared for, was doing. During this gruesome scene, Jessica's nephew, the 4-year-old son of her older sister Christy, was present. He had been under Rita's care for a few days due to Jessica's seeming improvement. The boy witnessed Jessica stabbing his grandmother multiple times and decapitating her. When he tried to intervene, Jessica, whom he called the little bastard, slightly injured him in the head. The young boy started vomiting upon witnessing the horrific scene. After killing her mother, Jessica called the emergency number from Rita's cell phone and confessed to murdering her mother, claiming self-defense, alleging that Rita had attacked her first. Then, Jessica felt she had to act fast and began repeatedly stabbing her mother. After decapitating and stabbing her mother over 100 times, Jessica dumped the head in a nearby neighbor's front yard. When the police arrived at the house in St. Clair, Sydney, New South Wales, Jessica was outside, her clothes stained with Rita's blood, holding a water bottle. She showed no remorse for her actions, only worrying about what would happen to her next. Jessica asked the police officers and later the detectives at the crime scene if it was possible to bring someone back to life who had been decapitated, believing in the possibility of medical miracles that could reattach her mother's head. A police officer responded that this idea was rather unrealistic. Yet Jessica insisted, thinking that doctors could perform miraculous surgeries and reattach her mother's head. She also inquired if she would face any consequences, like the death penalty, for killing her mother. When told that Australia does not have capital punishment, Jessica felt relieved. She also confessed to the police that the idea of decapitating her mother came from the horror movies she watched compulsively. This chilling conversation was recorded on the body camera of a police officer when he arrived at the scene at 11:43 p.m. on July 20th, 2019. First responders described the scene as one of the most horrific they had ever encountered. The day after the crime, on July 21, 2019, Jessica appeared at the court but did not apply for bail. A friend told the media that this was not surprising, as Jessica likely did not understand what bail meant. After a trial highlighting her long history of mental illness, Jessica was found guilty of manslaughter in December 2020, having pleaded not guilty to murder due to disability. In early 2021, she was sentenced to a maximum of 21 years and 7 months in prison, with a non-parole period of 16 years and 2 months, making her eligible for parole on September 19, 2035. The prosecutor told the court that Rita's gruesome murder was the peak of a lifetime of escalating violence from Jessica, progressing from hair-pulling to a deadly explosive attack. He also argued that Jessica was assessed as a moderate to high risk of reoffending and remained a continuous danger to the community. Christy, Jessica's older sister, stated that Jessica had killed and butchered their mother and that she could never forgive her for her actions. Rita's sister hoped that Jessica would receive the necessary help and that Rita could rest in peace, knowing Jessica was cared for by a system that had failed her in life. The case judge offered counseling services to the jury members, acknowledging that the distressing evidence they had heard could stay with them long after the trial. The judge acknowledged that during the jury selection process, many individuals refused to participate in a trial like Jessica's. She also stated that Rita's murder was one of the most severe cases of homicide a court could encounter. She described it as a crime of extraordinary cruelty and brutality, exacerbated by its occurrence in the victim's own home. Jessica's lawyer mentioned that his client had expressed remorse in a letter sent to her family after the crime. In the letter, Jessica admitted that Rita had not hit her and acknowledged that it was her fault that her mother was no longer alive. However, one of the psychiatrists who evaluated her noted that Jessica did not use social gestures to communicate and displayed a rather mild lack of emotion on her face. The psychiatrist also found no signs of schizophrenia or auditory or visual hallucinations in Jessica. The conclusion reached was that Jessica's risk factors could only be managed over the long term with a comprehensive mental health support plan. Jessica was placed in the most stringent unit of the women's section at the correctional complex. Since entering prison, Jessica has continued to cause trouble. On September 9, 2019, just 2 months after her arrival, she threw a teacup at another inmate following a disagreement over food trading. The next day, she was charged with assault at the local court but received no additional punishment. On October 14, 2019, she attacked another inmate, resulting in 5 days of solitary confinement in her cell. On November 3, 2019, she disobeyed an order, and on July 31, 2020, she damaged property, incurring a fine of $200 Australian. Another assault on November 21, 2020, led to 7 days in solitary, and in January 2021, she was convicted of common assault again without any further sanction. Jessica has defended her actions, stating that no matter what she does or where she goes, other prisoners will make her life miserable. She also mentioned that prison life is tough and not like the outside world. Mental health issues are prevalent among prisoners. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, 40% of Australian prisoners had a diagnosed mental illness in 2018. Furthermore, statistics show that 1 in 5 people with mental illnesses will interact with the criminal justice system at some point in their lives. While there is no direct causal link between having a mental health condition and committing a crime, these figures indicate that many individuals in Australian prisons had pre-existing mental health conditions. Research shows that people with mental illnesses are more likely to commit crimes, particularly those with psychotic disorders, as such episodes can lead to criminal behavior. Symptoms of bipolar disorder can be directly related to criminal acts, and extreme anxiety or stress can increase the likelihood of violent behavior due to heightened anger, agitation, or impulsivity. However, there's another side to this. The prison environment can worsen pre-existing mental health conditions, with violence and brutality from other inmates or prison staff potentially triggering or exacerbating mental health issues. According to the Australia Policy Development Centre, a prison is a dreadful place for someone with a mental illness. In Sydney Supreme Court on May 15, 2023, Justice Peter Hamill dismissed claims that Camilleri's sentence was manifestly excessive and that the sentencing judge had been incorrect in assessing the gravity of the crime. Justice Hamill nonetheless ruled that Camilleri should be resentenced, with support from Justices Christine Adamson and Richard Kavanaugh. He considered that her behavior of walking into the street with her mother's head and dropping it, as well as asking emergency services personnel whether they could reattach it, demonstrated the extent to which her conduct was divorced from the real world. Based on the evidence of multiple psychiatrists and a psychologist, Justice Hamill found Camilleri had only a simple understanding of moral wrongfulness due to her intellectual disability and autism spectrum disorder. He ordered that she be resentenced to a prison term of 16 years with a non-parole period of 12 years. And so, dear viewers, this concludes today's episode of Unreal True Crime. Please remember to subscribe and like if you appreciate my work. Good night, and I'll see you in the next crime story.